Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
With the audience here in Birmingham overwhelmingly in favour of Brexit, Philip Hammond knew he couldn't be too downbeat about the economic effects of Britain leaving the EU. But with the pound tumbling after yesterday's apparent backing by Theresa May for the hard Brexit approach, the Chancellor knew too that he had to reassure businesses who are worried about the uncertainty and the turbulence that could result from Brexit. So although he praised his predecessor, George Osborne, he abandoned one of his main economic targets, as our political editor Gary Gibbon now reports.
Yesterday, Theresa May thrilled Tory Leave supporters, sounding like one of their own, giving a date for the start of the talks process, all but ruling out full membership of the single market. Today, the Chancellor Philip Hammond, who'd warned before the referendum of the chilling effect of a vote to leave, tried to cool things down and struck a different note.
Many businesses which trade with the EU are uncertain about what lies ahead. They have understandable questions about the process of the negotiations, and I understand their concerns. Business, after all, hates uncertainty. The message may be simple, but I can assure you the process will be complex.
The Chancellor said business confidence could go up and down on a bit of a roller coaster. To ride that, he indicated he would increase borrowing to pay for infrastructure projects. And he formally ditched the general election pledge to hit a surplus by 2020.
The fiscal policies that George Osborne set out were the right ones for that time. But when times change, we must change with them. So we will no longer target a surplus at the end of this Parliament. But make no mistake, the task of fiscal consolidation must continue.
The Chancellor promised to honour any multi-year grants awarded by the EU to business before Brexit. He didn't disguise his concern about what lies ahead, to the annoyance of prominent Leave supporters.
As Chancellor, he unfortunately inherits all this great gloom from the Treasury and the Bank of England, encouraged by the previous Chancellor, and it takes a little while to make the adjustments. But they will make adjustments. This is wrong, all this gloomy,
Philip Hammond's going to cheer
forecasting.
Philip Hammond's going to cheer up at some point.
I think progressive cheering up from the Chancellor. I think by the time we get to the next budget, you'll see a much happier Chancellor.
There aren't many faces from the dismantled old Cameron regime in town this week. But one of them, Nicky Morgan, thinks Theresa May's tilting too much to the right by ruling out membership of the single market.
We must not put at risk that recovery in our economy that we've all worked so hard to deliver in the past 6 years.
Sounds like you think it is at risk.
Well, I think
this direction of travel on Brexit.
Well, I think, of course, I mean, what businesses are saying to us, that if they don't have, access to the single market, if we move away too much from the benefits that we have had, then yes, the economic recovery could be put at risk.
To stabilise the ship, the government now finds itself arguing for a policy it's mocked Labour for pushing in the general election.
We don't have the details from Mr Hammond, but my guess is that he will come up with a rule which will certainly allow him to borrow a reasonably significant amount in 2020 and may, as the Labour Party rule said, allow him to borrow to invest.
Friends of the Chancellor say his new borrowing for infrastructure will be very tightly controlled and many times smaller than Labour's planned spending. The session closed with another cabinet minister delivering more of the very type of gung-ho Brexit rhetoric that most unnerves the Treasury.
We are not afraid to lead or to take our place on the world stage, to shape the world rather than be shaped by it. No, we're not afraid. We are inspired, we are emboldened, and we're ready. So let's rise to the challenge, to our golden opportunity as never before. All of us together. Thank you.
He might not be afraid, some are, though not too many of them in this hall today.
And Gary Gibbon joins me here now in Birmingham at the Conservative Party conference, along with our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi. Now, this whole question of what's going on, I mean, do we know any more than we did?
So what Philip Hammond was up to today was trying to make sure that the euphoria that is in some quarters of the Conservative Party doesn't get completely out of hand. He was trying to pull things back a little bit. He's responsible for the Treasury. He's got to be the guy you sort of trust with the numbers, and if things go a bit wrong, he can't afford to be stood there with his trousers down. So he's trying to moderate some of the language, pull things back. He incidentally also, one thing we didn't mention in the package earlier, is talked about the possibility there might even have to be a bit of fiscal policy used to stabilise the economy. He didn't rule that out, so tax cuts potentially. Didn't commit to them further down the line. So he's trying to pull it all back, and there was a telling phrase he used just towards the end of his speech about referring to the choice the British people had made, and he called it bold. And I thought at that moment of one of those words that Sir Humphrey used to use in Yes Minister, when he thought something was just on the borderlines of being a bit reckless.
So do we actually have any real idea now of what the plan is?
So in her speech yesterday, Theresa May took full membership of the single market off the table. She didn't spell it out, she's a very cautious person, but when you look at what she said, the bones, the component parts of what she said, she took that off the table. And I understand the plan that's forming in number 10 is to try and break down all the bits of the single market that exist there, the different cohorts, the different units of industry that are there, and break those down into separate ones and try and come to little channels of trade deals on all of them. And there could be a little subgroup of a sector of the economy, and you basically try and reinvent as much as possible the situation as exists in the single market, but do it all over again in separate trade deals. Now, all of that, of course, requires the other 27 countries to say, oh, yeah, no, we'll sign up to that. And one of the key things in all of this is not just the mood they started, but the mood they're in at the end. How confident is Europe? How confident is Europe in the European project that it would allow us to sign up to something that looks rather advantageous?
Gary Gibbon. Well, now to Helle. Helle, pound down to where it was almost after the actual vote. What's going on?
Well, look, the market's very hard to read. You had the FTSE bounce because when the pound falls, it goes up. But as the former governor of the Bank of England once said, trying to predict the ups and downs of the pound is a mug's game. But clearly, the market is always going to balk at a harder, faster Brexit. And as you said, it slid to a 3-year low. It got very close to that 30-year nadir you saw in the week of the referendum. And when the Chancellor spoke, actually the details on the fiscal information was a bit light, and the market doesn't like that. So while Brexit has proved less, I guess, of a shock, people are very confused about the true implications of what it'll mean in the next 2, 3, 10 years.
Hello, Ibrahimi. Thank you. Well, I'm joined now by the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, David Gauke. He's one minister who made it straight across to the Treasury team in this outfit. Now, what is interesting is people are wondering, what was the mandate that the referendum actually gave them? Yes, leave Europe, but they didn't say whether they wanted a hard exit or a soft one.
Well, the very clear position from the British people is that we have to leave the European Union. It's now the job of the government to implement that in the national interest, and that's what we're determined to do. I think there is a clear signal, I think, from the British people that we do have to address this point about immigration and immigration from the European Union, and we have to, if you like, take back control in terms of migration policy. But our job is now to make sure that we get the best deal. That requires us to respond to the British people on immigration, but also requires us to get the best deal possible in terms of access for British businesses for goods and services to the European Union.
Well, now, it's no secret that you were against Brexit, and you've been brought across, as I say, from the previous team in the Treasury, the only minister to have been brought. Are you here to ameliorate the worst of Brexit?
No, I don't think I'd put it in those terms. The job of the government,
well,
and all of the
government...
Well,
difficult suddenly to change horses, isn't it? There you were, and now here you are trying to do a totally different job.
Those of us who are on the Remain side made the case to the British people. The British people rejected the arguments that we were making, but it's now the question of all of the government, whether we were Remainers or whether we were Leavers, to work in the national interest to deliver Brexit, and to do it in such a way that is good for the economy, good for the British people.
Well, Chancellor Hammond did actually hint that there is going to be some trouble down the line, that almost certainly there'll be, a little nastiness somewhere along the track. And I mean, he actually said no one voted for Brexit to make us poorer. What did you make of that?
Well, I think that's a perfectly fair point, and I think in terms of the uncertainty that is undoubtedly created by a vote for Brexit, we are going to go through a transitional period. We're going to go through a period of uncertainty, and what the Chancellor was saying today is that we need to be able to respond flexibly to that period of uncertainty. We don't quite know what's going to happen. It has to be said, and I speak as a Remainer, that the UK economy has done better in the months following the Brexit vote than many predicted. In part, I think, because the UK economy was actually doing better before the referendum than anyone had quite appreciated. But we have to recognise that there are potentially periods of uncertainty, volatility, and the UK government needs to stand by and be able to respond to that, and I think that's the responsible thing to do.
Now, when do your constituents come into play? When do you as an MP in Parliament have something to say about how this is to be done? Because at the moment, the claim is that Mrs May is saying we can trigger Article 50, we can do all sorts of things, we don't really need to talk to Parliament at all. But this is an elective democracy and people have elected you to represent them.
This is true, but the vast majority of the House of Commons voted in favour of having a referendum on European Union membership. Having had that referendum, I think Parliament has to respect that decision, even though most parliamentarians voted the other way, but we have to respect the decision.
But they've got to have a chance to respect it, haven't they? I mean, they've got to be consulted at some point.
Well, when it comes to Article 50, that is the triggering of Article 50, that is a prerogative power, and therefore the executive essentially can make that decision. But of course,
we've also tested in the courts.
It is being tested in the courts, but our view is it's very clear that that is a decision for the executive. But also, of course, we've got a great repeal bill which will go through Parliament, which will change the nature of the relationship we have with the European Union. So, of course, Parliament will be involved in this process.
But you as an MP, will you ever be consulted as to whether you want a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit?
Well, I think in terms of the negotiations, I mean, first of all, the government has to do the negotiations.
Well, you want some freedom of movement, don't you? And you also want to be part of the single market. Well, look, that is a very divisive issue.
I want us to respect the opinion of the British people.
Yeah, but
us
it ain't
having
quite
had
as
a
simple
debate.
as that, is it?
Look, of course, when it comes to the negotiations, that is a complex process. It's why, frankly, we can't give, to use the sort of cliche of the day, we can't give a running commentary on that, because we have to be careful in putting all our cards on the table, to use another cliche. But we have got to get the best deal for the United Kingdom, and of course, ultimately, it'll be the British people who will judge on how well we have done in terms of respecting their position that we leave the European Union, but also ensuring that the economy is strong and we've got access to those European markets, which are very important to us.
David Cork, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, now, welcome back to the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, where the new Prime Minister, Mrs May, is riding high after her clear message on Brexit and immigration yesterday. What about the men who used to run the show and delivered the first Conservative majority for 23 years? Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, has been out in search of that endangered clan, the Cameroons.
Less than 3 months into the job, and there's talk of a sellout. Yesterday, the box of Theresa May pin-up posters in the Tory shop.
9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So 24 hours later, how are the Theresa May posters? Blimey, they've sold out. All gone?
All gone, yeah.
You misjudged how popular she'd be.
But if you've got £35, you can still get this limited edition book of David Cameron's speeches and pictures.
What's happened to David Cameron?
Oh, it's lovely. Isn't that she? How hard-working he was? What a marvellous leader he was.
George Osborne and David Cameron, what's happened to them?
They seem to have disappeared off the surface of the Tory conference, really, it seems.
What about Osborne? Do you think he's finished?
I don't think so. I think he's still keen to carry on. I have that
But why
feeling.
is he not here, then?
Well, it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it, for them?
A bit embarrassing?
Yeah. Why? Well, because he'd been demoted suddenly and it was all rather quick.
George Osborne may be absent, but his northern powerhouse does have a small stall here. Only now it's got a big rival with friends in number 10, the Midlands Engine.
And it's what, 3 or 4 times the size of the northern powerhouse stand round the corner? Symbolic.
Tory backbencher Richard Drax is cock-a-hoop at the decline of the Ancien regime.
And this is so refreshing now to have Mrs May in charge, and at last we're going in the direction I came into the House of Commons to pursue, and she's doing it in a very calm and sensible way, and I'm right behind her.
It does seem like nearly everything that Cameron and Osborne stood for is being quietly ditched.
No comment.
Then who did we spot but Mr. Theresa May, today named as the 4th most influential right-winger in Britain.
I think that's highly unlikely, Michael, I have to say.
Well, apparently you are a big influence on the Prime Minister for some reason.
Well, Prime Minister and I have met...
Does she run her speeches by you?
The Prime Minister runs her speeches by her official advisers, Michael.
And you one of those?
I don't think so.
Is this a return to Thatcherism that we're seeing under your wife?
I have absolutely no comments about policy, Michael. You should know better than that by now. We've known each other actually, it's interesting. I think we've known each other for 40 years, something like that.
But I mean, it does seem to me that everything that Cameron and Osborne stood for is now being ditched. Is that a fair way?
I think questions like that, Michael, you're going to have to ask the Prime Minister herself.
All you have to do is deny it.
It's really is nothing to do with me, Michael. All I'll say was that I think, you know, I'll just reiterate all the nice positive comments that Theresa and Phil Hammond and others have made about David and George. So
there might be a place for George Osborne in her cabinet.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Well, few people were closer to David Cameron than his communications director, Craig, now Sir Craig Oliver. Having left Number 10 with his political master, he has rushed out a provocative memoir of the frenetic EU referendum campaign and its aftermath, called Unleashing Demons, the Inside Story of Brexit. And Sir Craig joins me now. You lay out in the book how Theresa May kept you hanging on, wouldn't commit, ran a submarine strategy, sort of swimming under the water and then popping up when it suited her. Do you think she behaved dishonourably?
No, I don't think it was dishonourable, but I think that what I'm trying to say in the book is it was frustrating. So what was happening in the run-up to the referendum campaign was the Prime Minister didn't know which side his Home Secretary was going to be on.
It was coming, wasn't it?
Well, I recount in the book that there was a moment where David Cameron was on a train to a speech with me, and I saw him suddenly pick up his phone, and he was on the phone to Theresa, and he was just saying, look, come on, this is very difficult, you need to be stronger on this message. And then later that day, Theresa May came out for Remain, but when she did come out, it was very much 51-49. And the story of the campaign was her being equivocal, and that was a problem for us. Now, it's perfectly legitimate.
But she let him down, didn't she?
Well, it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. I'm sure she was sincere in her views.
Why is it legitimate if she let down the campaign?
Well, no, because...
She helped you lose.
No, because I think what she was saying was that this is where I stand on Europe. I don't think the sky will fall in if we leave Europe. She was 51-49. Okay. I'm sure she was sincere in that.
You're very clear in here you really didn't like Michael Gove. Did you like Theresa May? Is she a nice person?
I worked with her very professionally. She's a very strong Home Secretary.
You like her?
I didn't really know her socially.
Really?
I didn't really spend that much time with her in that sense. I mean, she's a very, very capable politician.
OK, so how big a failure was it, losing?
I think, a massive one, because we...
For you personally?
Yeah, no, I accept responsibility for it. I was very significant part of that campaign, and I totally accept responsibility in that. We made a number of mistakes. I'm very clear about those. The two biggest ones, I think, were we believed in what James Carville said was the iron law of politics. It's the economy stupid. And we put all our chips on economic risk and believed that would trump all arguments. In reality, as we got closer to the day, it was clear that immigration was trumping it as an argument. We didn't have enough of an answer.
I mean, that's a really sort of interesting admission of failure in a way, in that you're saying someone else was wrong, rather than you were. You know, James Carville was wrong about that as a general rule.
No, we were wrong because we believed at that moment, I'm not trying to push it onto James Carville, we believed that would be a significant factor and would trump all arguments.
What was the other mistake you made then?
The second one was that we believed that millions of people who hadn't voted in 2015 and hadn't voted in many elections before that wouldn't vote this time. They did, nearly 3 million of them.
Is that it?
Almost all for Leave.
Those are the only two mistakes you made?
Well, you say, is that... No, there are other mistakes too. But you say, is that it? The reality of that is that those 2.8 million people were more than enough to ensure the victory of Brexit.
I just ask it that way because the book is very thin on admissions of where you went wrong.
I don't think so.
I mean, what else did you get wrong then?
Well,
what else were your big mistakes?
Well, what the book is trying to do is recount what was it like being in
No,
number
I know
10.
that, but what else did you get wrong?
Well, if you let me explain, Christian, one of the things that I'm trying to get across is what was it like being in the middle of this tumultuous campaign. We did not expect the number of people to come out in support of Brexit, very significant figures that did. We also had a coalition that stretched from the Conservative Party right away across to the Greens. But when we put that team on the pitch, they were all playing to different systems. They all had different messages. That was clearly a mistake, whereas Leave clearly had fingertip control of his messaging. We didn't, because we were relying on wide groups of people who had very different reasons for what they were doing.
I mean, that does feel like you're pointing the finger at other people. I mean, the book is full of sort of, it was Go's fault, it was the BBC getting it wrong, it was Boris, it was...
Not at all. I can't... I mean, look, you've got lots of bits of paper.
All right, well, let me
but you
put some
actually
specific...
haven't read it if you don't think that I'm accepting that there were mistakes.
No, well, I mean,
of course there were mistakes, and I take full responsibility for them.
Let me put you some specific criticisms. Roland Rudd, who was on the same side as you, says your involvement was the biggest disaster because you were stopping them from attacking other Tories. You know, you didn't want this blue-on-blue attack, so you weren't attacking Boris and Michael Gove.
I find Roland's attack extraordinary. The two things is, had we turned it into a blue-on-blue war, one of the biggest problems we had was that we were alienating other groups who thought that this was just a Tory battle. And one of the problems of constantly fighting each other and being at each other's throats was that it was alienating those groups. The other thing
it put the party before the question. That's the point, isn't it? Your concern was party management. You didn't want the Conservatives to look like you were at each other's throats.
I'm sorry.
You didn't attack the argument.
I don't... What? The argument was what? Attacking Boris and
you
Michael Gove?
You wouldn't go up against people on your own side, in your own party.
Of course we went up against people on our own side. But where I also think
Well, David Cameron wouldn't debate Boris Johnson.
Well,
that was your decision, probably.
Where I also think that Roland Rudd has got it wrong is he is saying that they should have been more positive at campaign and gone round singing Ode to Joy, and everybody would have been extremely happy with that. In fact, very, very specific analysis revealed that the key group of people in the middle who... You had a group on one side who were definitely going to vote to Remain, a group on the other side who were definitely going to vote to Leave, and a bunch of people in the middle who were not convinced that the European Union was a great thing, but were prepared to listen to economic arguments. And that's what we needed to focus on. And for Roland to say that we should focus on people who just already were saying that we should Remain...
criticism of you that that your team lied to him about...
Well, this is
TV appearances.
This is a completely separate
and were sort of up to dark arts, and that you were basically PR obsessed, and that was a mistake.
Well, I think
you were short-term PR obsessed.
I saw that anecdote in the paper today, and I don't recognise it in any way.
You deny it?
I don't recognise it. And yes, I do deny it.
Okay.
I don't recognise that in any way.
All right. Well, let me deny it. Let's move on.
Christian, you keep doing this. You're asking me questions. Let me answer them.
Well, you denied it.
No. But you asked me if we were PR obsessed. The reality of being in a modern government is you have to be able to fill the vacuum or it will be filled for you. You have to be able to tell your story or it will be told for you. And I think
but isn't
10
that
is
what people
rather
rejected
dated.
En masse? They hated the way you were running PR in the government. That's why Farage was so popular.
Do you honestly think, Christian,
you
that
were
they were voting on... Do you honestly think that the people were voting on the government's PR policy? I really don't think so.
They were voting on the style of government that you were propagating, and you got it massively wrong.
What evidence do you have for that?
You lost the referendum.
Well, yeah, no, people voted for Brexit. People voted. They didn't vote on whether or not we had a certain PR strategy. I think that's a pretty nonsense thing to say.
I mean, OK, you say it's a massive failure and you take responsibility for it. Given that, why have you got a knighthood?
Why have I got a knighthood?
Isn't that a reward for failure?
Look, I'm not going to justify why I've got knighthood. I just think that that's a fool's errand trying to do that. Other people can decide when... Because, you end up in a situation where any answer you give is not going to work.
I mean, as David Cameron's PR man, shouldn't you have advised him that it was a very bad idea to give you a knighthood? Because he would look bad as a result. It would look like cronyism as he left Downing Street.
I don't accept that. Look, other people can decide whether or not it's appropriate for me to have a knighthood.
Do you feel you deserve it?
I'm going to allow other people to... I mean, you can keep asking me this. I'm not going to answer any more on that.
I don't see why you don't want to address how you feel about... And this is a big honour. This is something that had been held by amazing knights of the realm, Winston Churchill, Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, and now Craig Oliver. You must feel
very
that you deserve it.
And the words that, to use a pun, I feel very honoured by it. But I'm going to allow other people to decide whether they think that's appropriate or not.
You're sort of out now, aren't you? Are you... If George Osborne asked you to come back into politics, would you come back?
No.
You're out forever?
I have no plans to go into politics anymore. I've had a very good 6 years, very happy doing it. I thought David Cameron was a great Prime Minister. I think history will see him as that. And I was very proud to work for him, but I think my time is done now.
Craig Oliver, thank you very much for coming in. Sir Craig, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Well, now, tonight's main news from here in Birmingham, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has warned of economic turbulence in the wake of the vote to leave the EU. I'm joined here now by Anna Soubry, who served as Minister in 3 departments under David Cameron, but is now back on the back benches, where you are pushing a rock up a hill. I mean, you're not going to win this thing, are you?
What's my rock?
Well, your rock is...
What's my rock, John?
Your rock is the referendum which voted against you.
Oh, no, absolutely right, and you absolutely are right, and it was 52-48, and we've said we'll deliver on it, and that's the job to be done, but let's not forget that 48%, and let's not also forget that it's right that we must now get the very best deal for our country. Yeah. And at the moment, Labour's saying absolutely diddly squat. So somebody's got to stand up and ask the tough questions and make sure we do get that best deal.
But at the moment, Parliament, you, an MP, basically has no say in this matter. Well, it's all going to be done by executive order.
Well, that's the thing we've got to make sure it doesn't happen. And I think it was quite interesting that yesterday the recognition of Parliament being involved. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with this legal challenge to the Article 50 trigger. I mean, I haven't seen the skeleton arguments, but it's really important that Parliament is involved in it. And also that, you know, everybody else gets involved in this, and business, most importantly, begins to speak out about what they want.
Don't you now have to speak out about what can be achieved rather than saying, no, this is horrible?
Oh, no, I don't do that. I mean, everybody knows my views on it. We've got to move on, and I absolutely have moved on. We've got to get the best deal for Britain, and that's why I'm such a passionate believer that, you know, that we want that free trade, and the Brexiteers, you know, the 3 of them, talk about that free trade, and in order to do that, we need to be a member of the single market.
But you're a diminutive minority in the party.
Well, do you know what's really struck me? One, that I thought that I'd get quite a bit of grief here, people saying, oh yeah, put a sock in it and all the rest of it. That'll be on Twitter now. But instead, I'm finding people are coming up to me and, you know, shaking my hand and saying, thank you, keep going, keep going. We mustn't forget that it was, you know, it was 48-52, and I know we've got to accept the result, but there are still a lot of people out there who believe in the European Union, but now we've got to move on, accepted that, but we've got to get the best deal. And we have to keep the Brexiteers, keep their feet to the fire.
Did you read the difference between Theresa May and Philip Hammond?
And Philip Hammond was being very realistic about things. And saying,
what about the Prime Minister? Was she being realistic?
I think what she was having to do yesterday was she was telling us about this bill that's going to go through Parliament. She was telling us about the trigger. We've seen the pound go down. There is a connection. Let's get real about this, guys. And of course she's going to give an upbeat speech. That's her job. Hammond is that cool, calm, you know, he's the accountant that comes in, often delivering the bad news. But he's a very, very good, he's going to be a great Chancellor.
Soubry, we haven't heard the last of this. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, that's the view from one party of the Tory pub. Let's now journey across to the other side and talk to Daniel Hannan, MEP, and a retiring MEP.
Oh, indeed.
Just as the battle commences, you're talking about getting out.
Well, that's the result of the referendum, John. There are no more British MEPs.
There's a huge amount to be done yet.
Yes, and we're going to make sure that we get this right. Well, I'm certainly going to see this process out until Brexit comes into effect. And the challenge now is not about whether it happens or when it happens, because we know all that now. It's about making it a cordial and mutually advantageous process that brings benefits to the rest of the EU as well as to us.
Doesn't quite sound like Theresa May yesterday. She was not very cordial. She was saying, you know, this is what we want.
No,
bang.
She said we wanted the closest relations with our European allies, and she's right to want the closest relations. We don't need to be part of a political union with other countries to have close, tight relations on diplomacy, defence, security and commerce.
What about single market?
Well, we definitely want to leave the customs union. The whole advantage of being outside the EU is we can have free trade with China, with India, with Australia. We can do huge amounts to boost developing countries.
The single market.
But, in terms of common rules, I think we should, of course, we want to be part of, we need to obey EU rules when we sell to the EU.
So the
we
European
shouldn't
Court of
impose all
Justice
of them on the vast majority of the UK economy that doesn't trade with the EU.
So still beholden to the European Court of Justice?
Well, look, when we sell to China, we meet Chinese regulations. When we sell to Russia, we meet Russian regulations. Of course, when we sell to the EU, as only 6% of our businesses do, we'll meet EU regulations. There may be 1 or 2 very specific industries where that's such a big part of their trade that it makes sense sector by sector for them to keep something closer to the current arrangements. But the vast majority of businesses in this country don't do trade with the EU.
You cannot have access to the single market without freedom of movement.
As a matter of fact, that's not true. The whole world has access to the single market. The EU just signed trade agreements with Colombia and Peru. I mean, it doesn't have to be with free movement. The argument against membership of the single market is nothing to do with immigration.
There's a distinction between France and Peru.
Yeah, but... Well, sure, okay. Even within the 3 EEA countries, one of them has restrictions on the numbers of EU migrants, and 2 of them don't. So it's just simply not the case. There's a different argument against accepting the jurisdiction of the European Court. Nothing to do with migration. It's to do with being the most competitive economy in the region, the place that people want to come and do business, cutting costs for the lowest paid people here, and providing a huge boost to developing countries.
Daniel Harron, thank you very much indeed.